Alrighty, folks. Welcome here. We're going to give everybody a chance to get on in here. Give you guys a second. Everybody's piling in. First couple of minutes are always awkward. So, all right. Maddie, we got a fair amount of people in here from the people that started it up on the lobby.
Yep, looks like almost everybody from the lobby is about here. So I think we're good to get going so we can stay on time track here. So thank you everybody for joining our first relaunching of the Plexus webinar program. We're really excited to be bringing this opportunity to you guys. And for our very first reboot here, we're going to be talking about reviewing PPAP for the supplier quality professional. Some of you who may be returning folks are going to recognize our very special guest speaker today, Jeremy Hazel, who's very well versed in giving these webinars to all of you. So I'm going to let him kick off and get started here, and I will talk to you guys in a little bit.
All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started here. So, as the slide implies here, we're going to be talking about reviewing PPAP. Now, when we talk about PPAP, we thought about doing something on PPAP for the practitioner. But I think that one of the most important skills in PPAP and one of the most important disciplines is the ability to review it, especially for the supplier quality professional. Because I think as a former supplier quality professional, the supply chains are getting longer, the amount of PPAPs are increasing. And this tool, if used correctly, is one of the primary differentiators between a program that launches on time, on spec, and on budget, and a program that struggles with supplier issues. So, a little bit about who I am. Like Maddie alluded to, some of you, if you were familiar back in 2023 and during COVID, you might have seen me on some of these other ones. I have been involved with PPAP, automotive, and aerospace now for the better part of 20 years, and I have created PPAPs. I've moved plants. I've launched new products using PPAP. And I also worked from the supplier side when we had single source suppliers in which whatever came through in the PPAP, I was going to be forced to sign. And I've also been over commodities in which I had 15 different suppliers in that same commodity. So when I thought a lot about the supplier quality side, I thought, how do I help the most people through the hour that we're going to spend together? So let's take a look at the agenda. So the first thing is, what is a PPAP? Now, everybody that attended this call, I hope that you already know what a PPAP is. But what I want to teach you in this webinar, I want to give you a different way to look at PPAP. I want to give you a different way to evaluate a PPAP. So we're going to start off by looking at what a PPAP is, and then I'm going to teach you a little bit of a new lens, right? How to see it a little bit differently. And then we're going to go through a tool that I created that I used when I was in industry to help create what I call a line of sight. So it's a way to align the PPAP review, especially for supplier quality associates, that allows you to do a more thorough review in a shorter amount of time. Now, if you are the person that assembles PPAP in your organization, this webinar is also for you because if you understand how the SQE is going to review it, you're going to be able to put together a submission that stands a better chance of getting accepted. So whether you're on the submission side or the review side, you're going to get value from this. However, this webinar is primarily geared towards supplier quality associates who are reviewing PPAPs from the supply base. Now, one of the areas that I really wanted to talk about when we think about the hour we're going to spend together, I want to show you as an SQE how to connect the dots and communicate to management. Because one of the things with supplier quality associates I see time and time again, and we go into dozens and dozens of companies a year, is a lot of very skilled technical people who cannot communicate what that PPAP is actually telling them. So when we think about how to add value in this webinar, these are the two areas that I think are going to be the most valuable once you learn to see this through a different lens. Now, toward the end there, we're going to go about 45 minutes or so, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, right? It's not an exact science. we're going to do a little bit of wrap up and Q&A. So what I'm going to ask you to do as we go through the webinar, Maddie is going to be monitoring the Q&A, and at the end of the webinar, we're going to be answering questions. Now, full disclosure, I'm not even going to pretend that if there are 50 questions, I'm going to be able to get through them in 10 minutes. But I'll do the best I can to answer the most that I can, and we'll see where we kind of end up. So that's kind of the agenda. Other than that, I think we're going to have a good time there. Let's go ahead and take the next step. Now, for you folks here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to deploy a poll. So, Maddie, you want to go ahead and apply poll number 1 here?
Absolutely. So this is just a very short poll here for all of you guys.
All right. So, this poll is pretty simple here. It just has a couple questions. What's your current role in the organization, right? I review and approve PPAP. I oversee an organizational unit or other. The other reason or the other question that I need to know a little bit about is your position within the tier chain. And the reason is this: if you are a tier 1 supplying to an OEM, I might frame the conversation differently than if you're a tier 3 or 4. So your position in the tier chain affects some of the examples that I use and the way that I talk about it. Plus, how you answer question 1 is going to tell me whether or not you're the one that are approving things, whether you're managing people that are approving things, because if we have a lot of people that are managing people, I will change up the way that I talk about it. So typically we'll go through and we'll stop at about 70%. Right now it looks like we got 100% answered. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. All right. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share results. Now, the reason why I share the results, a lot of you out there review and approve PPAP, about 50% of you. So this tells me who's out there. This tells me exactly what I should be talking about. The other one, all right, we got 50% of people at a tier 1 level. So we're going to be talking about the tier 1 of the OEM. And then we have an above average number of tier 2 or below. So the good news is we got the top dogs in the tier chain. We got some of the smaller suppliers out there. This tells me I got to come up with a couple small supplier examples in order to communicate. And then what brought you here? This tells me what you guys want to know. Looking to improve the quality of the PPAP review and the speed. So the good news is, if that's what you're looking for, I think I hit that, right? So I think we're in good shape. Let's go ahead and get started on the technical content. All right. So let's start a little bit here with what is PPAP. Now, I want to start with the traditional way we look at PPAP. There are 3 usual steps when we talk about PPAP. So, step 1, what level of submission am I looking for? Traditionally, there's different levels of submission. You all know this. And so it's, is this a level 3? Is this a level 4? Is this a level 5? What are we doing with it? Step 2, usually of the review, is what elements should be included in PPAP. And then this third step is, are all elements there? Most PPAP review ends up with these 3 steps being performed at almost a mechanical basis. So what I want to challenge you to think about, the steps that I have listed here are really a superficial way of working. What I want to do is I want to take the 3 steps and I want to shift the paradigm a little bit into 3 questions. Okay? So instead of thinking through it as a stepped process, I want you to think about it as a layered process of looking at this PPAP at different levels of depth. And the 3 questions that I want you to look at here. First one, and this is the one we always answer, right? This is the superficial one. Is it done? How many times have you gotten a PPAP put on your desk, sent over from a PDF, and the goal was to check the box and move about your day? A lot of reviewers go down this path, and that is where they stop. This is a very superficial question. It leads to superficial answers, and it doesn't gain any insight. Now, what I'm going to challenge you to do is go one level deeper. Instead of asking, is it done? I want you to think about the last 3 or 4 PPAPs that you did. And I want you to ask yourself, is it any good? And I'd be willing to bet you about half of you out there, maybe a little bit more, are not going to know whether or not the last PPAPs you approved were actually good versus was I able to check the box. This is where we can get you through this methodology that I'm about to teach you. But the third one, and I think this is an important thing for PPAP reviewers, what can my organization learn from this PPAP? Most of us don't think that way. We take our customer specific requirements that we've given to the supplier, we run it through the elements, and we say, yep, I can check this box, I can sign the part submission warrant, we're good. What I ask you to do is go, is what you're doing actually good? And then what's the insight that your organization gained from going through this activity? Most PPAP reviewers can't answer that third level of depth. And so when we think about these questions usually have some bullet points to them. The first one, the superficial one, the cost of admission, right? Is the PPAP done? Does it contain the right elements? And does it allow me to check the box? We beat this one to death. When we ask the question, is it any good? Is this document that's been provided to me any good? Does the PPAP show that conforming product will actually be delivered? And does the PPAP show conformance with our particular CSRs that we have driven down to that sub-tier supply chain? The question I want to spend a lot of time on today, and I'm going to give you a method here to do this quicker and, of course, better. When you review a PPAP and you ask, what can my organization learn from this? Here's the thing I want to challenge you on. What does this PPAP tell me about where I should augment my own process as the result of the PPAP? Let me give you an example. Let's say you're looking at an organization's FMEA at a PPAP, and you see an occurrence of 6 and a detection of 8. As the reviewer, you might look at the RPN if it's 4th edition. You might look at the AP if it's AIAGVDA. But the thing that I would challenge you on is that supplier has just told you there's a better than average chance they are going to have this cause occur, and there's a very real chance that will escape their detection, right? With an occurrence of 6 and the detection of 8. So as the SQE, what does this tell you about what you should do to fortify your own process? Does this tell you that you may need a hard tooling solution, or you may need 100% incoming inspection? When you review a PPAP, it's putting together a story. And it's the story of what this particular supplied part is about to do to your product or to your process. And this second bullet here, when you approve that PPAP and you're going to this third level of depth, you should be communicating to your organization. So if you bring on a new, let's say a new bolt, right, that fastens something to something else, what does this new bolt do to the product that it goes into? What does this new bolt do to the process that it may be introduced to? And this review of PPAP should lead to a sharing with other departments. Let me give you an example. Let's say that it's the design FMEA that's part of a PPAP, right? This particular supplier is design oriented. So you look at the occurrence and you look at, hey, we don't have a lot of experience, let's say, with the material this bolt is made out of. You look at the detection from the FMEA and you realize that the testing may not be proven, right? They may be doing some testing that is not quite organizationally accepted or industry accepted. Should you probably adjust your warranty claim percentage preparing for infant mortality failures from this particular product? This is the kind of information that a good, thorough PPAP review should be able to communicate up to other departments. So as the SQE, the goal is not to ask whether or not the PPAP is done. The goal could be seen as, well, is it going to provide me the conforming product that we're looking for? But more importantly, what is the story of this part in terms of what it does to my product and what it does to my process. Because this product, when it goes into your processing, it's going to either cause chaos or it's going to be a helper. So, one of the things that I like to do when I tell the story of PPAP review and when I teach this to other SQEs, the PPAP tells the story of what's about to happen to your product or process. And you're going to have to learn as SQE how to see this at a deeper level than simply a superficial, is it done? Now, let's take a look of in terms of what we can do to facilitate this deeper look, right? So, if we look at PPAP as a story, because I'm sticking with that theme all the way through here, stories have connection. Imagine that you're reading a book, and while the chapters may be linear, right? So, when we look at a book as a series of chapters, within each chapter, there are connections. There's an arc, and there's some form of a beginning, a middle, and an end of a story. Imagine reading a book in which each chapter is a separate story, but these three don't really connect anywhere. So, the way that I approach this was when we think about traditional PPAP review, most SQEs that I'm involved with use what we call the linear approach, right? They go through and they check the design record and they're looking for symbology, they're looking for characteristics. They then go through and check the DFMEA. They'll then check the process flow diagram. It very much becomes an 18-part check of things in isolation. Okay. This isolation is actually a majority of the problem. So this leads to inefficiency because what we don't recognize is the interconnectedness of things. Now, everybody out there that's looking at this diagram right now might have a different interpretation of this diagram, and that's completely fine. But I want to show you how this works. If you take the 18 elements of a PPAP and you break them down into smaller chunks, and these are just my chunks, right? You have a different way of seeing the world. I totally respect that. There are operational elements of the PPAP, like what happens when you hit the manufacturing floor. There are design elements of the PPAP. There are evaluation elements of the PPAP. And lastly, there are administrative elements, right? And the way that I look at it in a PPAP is that these administrative elements are relatively low value, right? As an example, the sample product, the master samples are all just manifestations of the operational side, right? The part submission warrant, while it is the single most valuable piece of paper in the submission because it allows you to ship parts and money moves, a part submission warrant is not going to make or break the PPAP in terms of quality. So, one of the things that I want you to understand is the PPAP has elements that feed one another. And if you say, look at the process flow chart without regard to the control plan, you're not going to be able to see the connection that occurs. If you review the PPAP from an interconnected viewpoint, it is a more efficient and effective way to do PPAP because it puts the elements, the 18 elements, in context. It shows how they interrelate. There's a really good book out there called The Solution Focus. You can get it on Amazon. And the thing that I took from that book was the action is in the interaction of things, right? So this interconnection allows for you as the reviewer to gain insight that is just not possible taking it one element at a time. So what we did here is when I review a PPAP, this is typically what I touch, right? When you look at the design FMEA, the design FMEA should ideally boil down to characteristics, and those characteristics should probably apply on the flow chart. The tolerances that are design record, right? When the DFMEA creates the design record, tolerances begin to show in the control plan. So the design record also typically has a lot of our material performance, right? That you're going to do during validation. So if we understand what touches what, and we realize that these are just kind of the outputs and the outliers, we're able now to more effectively float through an effective PPAP. So Summarizing this up here, PPAP is actually a story. PPAP elements can be reviewed linearly, but it leads to inefficient and ineffective review. And so to get efficiency and effectiveness up, you should be looking at the interaction of elements to determine whether or not we go down to the right level of those three questions. To drive this home, we created a tool. Now, full disclosure here. After we record this webinar, we're going to be sending the recording out to you guys through an email. When we do that, we're going to have a link to the tool that I'm showing here so that you guys can download this for yourself. So if you like the tool that I'm about to show you, shamelessly steal it, take it, and use it. If you don't like it, you never have to see it again, right? So the tool that I'm about to show you is a way to look at the interaction of things in a PPAP with the intention to get a better review in less time. To do that, let's put it in the context of a real practical example. Let's suppose you're an SQE in an engine assembly plant, right? You're buying piston pins from a vendor. Now, we know that the inner diameter is critical, right? This is an important characteristic. It's got a little diamond on it, right? Rocket science. And we know the overall length is really not critical. So the tool that we're going to be using to do this review of the PPAP is really what we call the line of sight tool, right? What this tool is going to do, it's going to look at some of the documents, right? It's going to be walking through and it's going to be looking at the interconnectedness of things. As an example, the line item from the control plan matches the one that the FMEA said was going to be there. Some of the stations listed, right, from the flowchart relate back to the DFMEA input. In the FMEA, it's going to be operational definition. So the creation of a tool like this can help you trace the core elements. Now, I'm just going to give you an example. We should ideally be looking at things that matter, right? So in automotive, special characteristics, near and dear to our heart, right? So this is a tool that I would use primarily for special characteristics, but it can really be used for every characteristic on the print. And the reason why I say the print, most PPAP is done for, let's say, non-design responsible organizations, right? At the tier one level, so I'm talking to those tier one folks out there, you are most likely design responsible. But for your tier twos, threes, and fours, the further you go down the tier chain, design responsibility doesn't quite match, right? It doesn't actually matter. So when we think about it, the print is the thing that we want to gather around because the design related elements culminate in the print. And that print is what the processing guys use to take it all the way through to the part that we can touch and experience. So the first area of the tool that we're going to send you guys is anything that's design related. Now, if you're not design related, this might not apply to you. So for my tier ones, technically, I'm pretty sure you guys are mostly design responsible. We have to understand the purpose of the design related elements. Many times in PPAP review, we get lost in the detail, right? And we can't see the forest through the trees. So realize here, design elements ideally fulfill functions. Okay, now if you're not design responsible, pay attention to this because this might be a learning opportunity for you. When you sign up to provide a part, the part has to provide some function, right? It exists in the design for some reason. It attaches something, it accelerates something, it supports something, right? There's a certain amount of function that this part has to perform. And the design work that's done eventually creates characteristics. And those characteristics are how the function of the part comes into existence. As an example, if I take this marker and I think about the cap having to seal against the pen, the option for its sealing has to do with the diameter of the cap. The diameter doesn't exist simply because I wanted to put it on the print. The diameter of the cap exists for that sealing. Now, I don't know whether or not you can hear this at home or not, but when it comes together, it snaps. That snap is an intentional choice of material which will yield a little bit, but yet remain rigid enough to stay on the cap when it's in place. So even the material choice is a design element. And eventually, this design work eventually derives characteristics on a print or a spec, maybe if it's bulk material. And so the reason we do this is the print becomes the primary communication tool to the manufacturing side. And a lot of our material test results and validation and everything in a PPAP will tie back to validation testing at the design side. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in the processing side, but most of it is having to do with design. So when we do this in the line of sight tool, we start with the product characteristics. So even in the design side, when we get that PPAP, we focus on the product characteristic and we put the DFMEA severity in there. Now, we're not replicating the DFMEA, but think about this as the PPAP reviewer. If you think about your PFMEA down the road, does the design severity play a role in the PFMEA? Let me give you an example. If I look at this inner diameter, and later on I look at the process flow and I look at the PFMEA, and it has a severity for a failure mode equal to 5. Did the design FMEA tell you it was going to cause regulatory noncompliance? Absolutely. So we're pulling elements of the DFMEA that we're going to need when we evaluate this characteristic. We then look at the special characteristic call out on the FMEA. Is it significant or not? And then we're bringing in the testing information. Now, notice what we just did here. We linked. So now follow along with me here. If we come back to here, what I did is I started off here, right here with the design record, linked the things that needed to be done to the DFMEA, brought in my material performance test results, potentially my dimensional studies. I know those are more process. And I even brought in your qualified lab docs. So I'm looking at this not as 4 distinct elements in isolation. I'm looking this as what area of these things interconnect and how am I getting a good line of sight back to the most common areas of the PPAP review. So if I'm looking here, based on this template with what we just hear, are there areas we see as potentially missing areas for further review? Right here, and again, I'm the reviewer. I am not making these documents. If I start with the overall length and I see right here that I'm missing qualified laboratory documents relating to testing, I have questions. Can I trust the dimensional results that are coming off that organization's overall length measurement? What's the amount of error that might have been in the lab, right? Because here, oh yeah, we met the lab criteria, but the qualification might be missing. Now I at least have something and I'm hunting intentionally. I'm hunting with purpose. I'm not just arbitrarily out there hoping I get it. Now, once we get through the design related stuff, we start with some of the flow chart. Now, the flow chart for me is the first place the characteristics derived. Remember earlier we were looking at the ID and the overall length. This is the first place they show up. So what I'm looking for here, I'm setting the stage in my flow chart. Is op10 present in the flow chart? Is op10 present in the PFMEA? And is op10 present in the control plan? Notice that I'm not taking the FMEA in isolation and trying to blow it all out. Right here, I'm saying, okay, I've got characteristics. I've got characteristics from back here. I know a little bit about the DFMEA design side, and I should be able to see the ID and the overall length now formed in op10. And I now see at least op10 has these characteristics in the flowchart, the PFMEA, and the control plan. So I'm taking the operational side and I start moving it in from the design record. Okay. This is a key differentiator. We start with the design stuff. We move into the flowchart items. Now the linear view continues. And folks, what I'm doing, because I needed to make this not an eye chart, I've broken out these areas. When we put it all together, it will linearly flow, I promise you. So when we come into the next section now, we want to come into the FMEA. And you see right here, I've got the little excerpt from the design. Once we know that the flowchart has similar characteristics, because honestly, the value of the flowchart is simply making sure that you can follow the process steps. And those process steps are inclusive of the characteristics. When we look at the PFMEA, there are a couple of key points that we want to bring in. The first one, the PFMEA identifies the mechanisms of failure of the characteristics that form the product characteristics. The PFMEA should also operationally define the characteristics created at the station, and the PFMEA should set the stage for further refinement by the control plan. Okay? So in order to do this, we set it up for a line-by-line comparison with the control plan. The other thing now, when we talk about operational definition, this might be a topic for further study for you guys. Operational definition was an important concept originally kind of pushed by Deming in the 80s. And there were two types of definition. There's conceptual and operational. So when I go to operational definitions are very specific. So when I review an FMEA and when I review a PPAP, I'm looking for op10, boring the hole, right? And then we've got hole diameter. Now, this is a product characteristic. Now, let's take a look at this real quick. Based on the PFMEA, all right, now this is a key here. There's one that is inherently obvious, and then there is one that is not so obvious listed here, right? What issue do we immediately see when we compare it against the DFMEA information? So here's what we had from the design side, right? When we go to the PFMEA and we bring in the severity, on the PFMEA, it shows an 8 in severity, but the DFMEA shows a 9. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of what has to do what because as PPAP reviewers, you got that core knowledge already. But remember that severity in the PFMEA can never, ever be less than the design. It can be greater, but it can never be less. So right here, this would be a huge red flag. And you'll notice that without the reference back to the design, looking from a line of sight perspective, this may not be as easy to catch. Okay, that's why we have to look at the interconnectedness. The DFMEA severity is connected to the PFMEA severity. And these two should ideally match, or the PFMEA could be larger. Now, the other thing that's interesting, I did one of these that was very obvious, but what about this one here when we talk about operational definition? If I'm cutting to a length and I have overall length, might this be an incorrect function? Absolutely it is. Remember that when we have function, when we put op10 down, if it's just boring the hole in the project, we're good, right? That's all it's got to do. It could be hole diameter, hole location, hole condition, roundness, no burr, anything related to that hole, I could get behind. But right here, this gives the process an entirely different function. This is now cutting the length. This would be a red flag to me to determine whether or not the rest of this actually matters, or whether I need to make sure that, hey, we need to correct that so that the function is properly represented, so that how we measure the function is actually correct to the function that we're actually measuring. So when we look at the PFMEA, we're bringing in elements of the D, we're bringing in elements through the flow chart, and we're doing it in a linear fashion. So this is a whole different way to look at it. And it's a very easy way. And we're dealing with the interconnectedness. The other thing that I like about this method is in doing the failure chain, I personally like to do cause mode effect because the bit war, the hole was too small, which led to rework. Putting these three things side by side and going from cause to effect, in my mind, makes it very clear that they have a good failure chain. I'm not saying we rewrite the FMEA. I'm saying, especially for the things that you've determined matter and might be critical, we should at least do this, line them up, and determine if this is actually logical or not. This makes the logic very, very simple. Now, when we kind of wrap this around home, right? We go to the control plan. Now, notice here, this is an important piece here. When we end the FMEA, the boring of the hole will be on line 34. The overall length will be on line 35. I then check the control plan to make sure that 34 is on 34 and 35 is on 35. What I want is one-to-one agreement between this line on the FMEA relates to this line on the control plan. And then I'm checking for the critical characteristics, the significant characteristics being pressed down. And one of my pet peeves here, and this is what the control plan does really well, process and product characteristics should be separated on different lines. So when you look at a control plan, in the characteristics column, there's either product or process, and it's one or the other. You should never, ever, ever have a product and a process characteristic on the same line. That's just bad form. If I see that, I know the supplier doesn't know what they're doing, and there's a little bit of education that needs to be done here. And the reason why I want to do it this way, let me turn off my annotation for just a second. You guys might be familiar with y equals f of x. This is a Six Sigma. This is made popular by Six Sigma. I shouldn't say they invented it, right? It's been around forever. The y is always the output. The x's are the inputs. You monitor the output. You control the input. So back with the DFMEA, that hole diameter is the output. That's the product characteristic. What I'm looking for here is, did they really do a nice job of identifying their process characteristics and augmenting the PFMEA? And what I look for here, when we look at the control plan, I'm intentionally looking at the control strategy. The control plan is the operational granular definition level, let's say, of the FMEA, right? So the control strategy, when I know the failure chain, which is back here in my linear analysis, and I know the bit wears leading to the hole being too small, when I look at their control strategy, I'm just saying, does the sample size and frequency match the risk? Let me give you an example of where that might not happen. Let's say that bit wear is the cause that we're trying to look at. And the bit wears maybe every 10,000 parts. But in high volume manufacturing, you may be measuring every 15,000 parts. At that point, the sample size and the frequency to detect that particular failure cause does not make sense. Meanwhile, let me give you one that may be a little bit too overzealous. Is, let's say you're looking at a broken bit, but you're checking the bit 100% of the time in between each part. That bit is not going to break that often. So that might be a little bit ridiculous and might be overkill. But you have to know the failure chain, and all you're doing here is the SQE is saying, yeah, sample size and frequency matches. I'll give you one from the molding side. We were checking the dimensions of a part but we were changing material lots about 3 times in between those evaluations, which means you had 3 different lots of material running through, and then you're just checking a part every so often in terms of time. That control strategy was absolutely ridiculous because there was a lot of variation that was going on that you were not planning for. So when we do this part, this also ties in MSA and SPC. Now, notice I put it under the control plan items because this is where the MSA rears its ugly head, right? As well as some of the dimensional capability studies. Let's say that you have capability that is at the borderline, like 1.33 on this special characteristic. So it might be in the yellow area, but if your MSA is 35%, you have something you need to really look at. Now, some of you out there will go, well, gauge R&R less than 10% is good, 10 to 30 is questionable, and over 30 is no good. I wouldn't approve it. I guarantee you, you're in this game long enough, you will run across measurement systems that are greater than 30% that are at the upper edge of either being cost effective or might be at the upper edge of technology, in which you will have to work with that supplier in order to form a gauging system that gets you quality parts. Eventually, on a long enough time frame being in this game, you're going to have to make a concession. So that's out there. It's a thing, and anybody that's been around a while has dealt with this sort of thing. I'll tell you, my favorite one was when it passed as a result of study variation, but because they were selling tolerances that were way too small, the percent of tolerance was astronomical. So the gauge was good until you applied the tolerance over. So here, we're going to have to really look at the capability. We're going to have to look at the gauge R&R percentage, and we're going to have to determine how close we can get in terms of the sample size and frequency to balance the profitability of the program as well as the effectiveness of the program. The other thing I would look at here is the SQE win control method. When I use the term accessible, let's say that you're measuring a part every 10 pieces and you're recording it on some sort of an audit log. And I can retrieve that audit log and see what went into that lot of parts. That's accessible, right? But what happens if it's simply on the work instruction and they're measuring it, but it's not written down anywhere? When you have a problem eventually, and that control method is simply a work instruction, but you don't know what went on with that lot, you're going to have a problem. So for me, this would raise a flag with me and the supplier going, okay, I understand you have a need for speed, let's say, but I have a need to be able to check the parts that were coming off and know what happened to a lot that I may be having problems with. And if we can't do that, we got to meet somewhere in the middle. So when we put all of these together, we get to this full line of sight. And now I know this is a bit of an eye chart, so I'm not implying that we should all read this. But think about if you went real simple red, yellow, green. Does this tell you where the bodies are buried? Does this tell you where the red items are? This is going to be much faster, and it's going to give you a heat map in a way, if we go red, yellow, green, so to speak, of the areas that you really want to dig down to the level of. This is the power of that line of sight theory. This is the interconnectedness of PPAP review. And for SQEs, we can say time is money because I know that there's probably 15 PPAPs from new parts, change parts, all of these things. But at a certain point, we've got to be able to look at it and go, here's the risk that we are introducing, and here's where I should really spend my time. Now, this next piece here, and I realize we're going to be close on time, so I'm almost done here. With the SQEs that I've gotten a chance to work with in the past, we know that the details matter. And traditionally, your SQEs work at a more granular level. And they continue to ask why, right? We're geared on that for the entire industry, right? The AD, the 5Y, we'll ask why until we get down to this molecular level of stuff. What I'm going to challenge you to do is the SQE. If you understand that PPAP is a story, and that after doing this type of review, You know where you need to focus. The piece that I want you to think about is intentionally in your career, thinking macro. And when I say thinking macro, the micro is easy. It's easy to dig down. It's easy to get granular. It's easy to get lost in the details. But I challenge you to say, okay, what does this mean for our company? We've just did the PPAP review. What does it mean for the company? Instead of asking yourself why, now you have to ask yourself, what do I do with this? Because the best information, improperly applied, will yield zero net benefit for your company. So here's an example. I'm going to teach you a little bit on how to read this. Now, this thing here, this is the AIAG VDA version of FMEA, right? This is a software view. I'm going to give you the abridged version of this, right? I don't expect you to become AIAG VDA experts. We're in Op 70, where we're doing a riveting operation. We're supposed to attach the support to the base, and pull-out resistance is the thing that we're measuring. Now, the failure that could occur, right? Pull-out resistance could be below spec, caused by inadequate tool wear monitoring. So the tool wears, we don't catch it, right? All we have to prevent that is the operator doing checks, right? During their autonomous maintenance. And if it happens, we have 100% visual in station inspection. Now, the thing I want you to see if I'm reviewing this PPAP, severity of 3, occurrence of 6, detection of 8. Did this supplier promise you they will never, ever send you a bad part? Absolutely not. They told you brace for impact because our prevention is pretty weak and our detection is largely garbage. So now, you as the SQE see this. It's easy then to go, oh, this is a low risk. Well, it's a low risk because of the severity, but does this tell you that you had better brace for impact in terms of you may have to beef up your own incoming inspection? You may have to put a hard piece of tooling in there in order to protect yourself. Somehow you should probably spend some money because it's not if they pass the part to you, it's definitely when. This is what I'm talking about, that the PPAP is a story. So this story of this PPAP, and especially the PFMEA in this case, is telling you that this particular riveting machine, this operation, is about to pass a part to you that is going to rock your world. So now what do you do with that? You can go back to the supplier, and that's one option. Or you might have to spend money on your own process design. So learning how to communicate this is a skill that I really challenge SQEs to get good at. How do you work up in the macro to communicate what you learned from the PPAP in order to change the organization's situation? So let's take a look at apply the PPAP for the piston pin, right? Because we went through and we took a look at this. So here's just some questions, and I'm not saying we're not going to dig into the details, but with 35% gauge R&R and marginal capability, if it comes across that we're going to do incremental checking of the product, is that going to be adequate? Or maybe should we explore the fact that we may need to do 100% hard tool checks using a gauge? I mean, let's say it's a micrometer or something, it's at 35%, maybe you're going to have to do 100% pin check or something like that, right? Something with a hard tooling. If the control method, the measurement data is not available, should we be better protecting our own line through increased inspections or product on our side? Because if there is a problem and you go back and you ask for the data so you can trace the lot, it's going to be, I don't know. So decisions like this, and these are things we think about from the SQE side that add value, because the value is not your signature on that page. The value is the insight that you provide that allows your organization to make the difference. What impacts could this decision in terms of program viability or profitability, what does the decision carry, right? Let's say that you're making 15% margin, but now it's going to be $50,000 to bring on this new gauge. What does that do to the profitability on the piece price? And lastly, oh, I think we might have lost the. Let me just stop my share real quick here. I just lost the share on my side. I want to make sure that we're wrapping up here. All right. There we go. All right. If we're not sure about the qualification of the lab, you remember back in the day when we were looking at laboratory qualification? Should we insist on additional testing or should we plan for increased warranty cost? Folks, approving PPAP for the SQE is a very important task. What I would challenge you to do is think at a deeper level on the question. Use the line of sight tool in order to evaluate the PPAP as an aggregate whole, not as just a series of isolated documents. And lastly, be able to answer the question, what do I do with this information? One of the things that I used to do with my teams when I worked with SQEs, when they would review PPAPs and they'd bring problems, my favorite thing to ask them was, so what? All right. And what I was doing, I was pushing them. What does it mean? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to know? And your management and your organization is going to ask for the same thing. So, that being said, let's do one more poll here, right? Because I've been blathering on for the better part of an hour now. Matt, are you with us?
I sure am.
All
Let's
right,
get started with that
let's launch it.
uh, poll here. All right, this one only has two questions for you guys.
Yep. This is based on what you saw today. What do you consider to be your most challenging pain point, right? So if you said, wow, I like everything you said, where's my challenge? Being able to implement this, or wow, a lot of what you said, I may not have the technical knowledge to grasp, or wow, this might be something that the suppliers really struggle with. And the reason why I'm interested in this question, so many times people think that PPAP struggles are a competency issue in terms of technical ability, but in reality, it could be cultural, like at the supplier. Okay. And we're at 100%. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and we're going to share the results. So this is interesting. We had a 50% OEM area. We had a little bit under for the sub tier. Supplier competency being the clear winner here. Now, if we're talking about the tier twos, threes, and fours, right, and we're kind of wrapping this part up, one of the things that I would say to that is if you are one of those sub tier suppliers, let's say, and you're supplying to a higher tier, I would highly recommend that you try that linear approach and against one of your PPAPs you're about to submit and see if it cuts the muster there as we go through up the chain. And if it's supplier competency, that's going to be a cultural piece. So I think that this is an interesting part, and that's a story for another time. And lastly, some of you are going to educate the supply base, focus on connection as part of the review. And then there's equal part. We're at about a 30-30-60 split here. So some of you chose more than one. Seek out more education on the elements of PPAP. All right. All right. So with that being said, I'd encourage you to submit your questions. Maddie, we're going to do a little bit of Q&A here. Why don't you queue up the questions we got? And I'll do my best to answer them here with the time we got, and we'll be right about on time to get on out of here.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like we don't have too many. One of
Good.
the ones that I saw recurring here, just about asking about sharing the recording. Once this is all completed in about a day, you'll receive an email and that will have a link to our YouTube channel, which will have a recording of this webinar. You can feel free to share it with whoever you would like. Jeremy, I don't know if you remember, but you mentioned a book
Yeah.
pretty early on in the presentation. Amy wants to know the name of that book again.
Yep. This is an interesting one. I read a lot that's not necessarily in industry. There's a book out there called The Solution Focus. And the reason why it interested me, it was a book on why root cause analysis is the wrong way to go. and why looking at what goes right is a better path forward. So you're looking at when it went well, what were the things that went well? And so the solution focus, the only place I've ever found it is on Amazon. So it's not one you can pick up at your local bookstore, but Amazon's got a copy. It's in its second printing and it's still very valuable or very viable. Yep.
Great. Okay, Jennifer says, since we are design responsible, we don't get DFMEAs from suppliers, and my company has only done system level DFMEAs. So how would you analyze based on that? I usually only have a design record as input to review of the PPAP from component suppliers.
That's okay. What I would do if you're the design responsible entity, now this is something that's going to force it, right? Traditional design goes down levels. So you're right. You're only getting the system level, right? What I would probably do is let me just draw on my screen here real quick. I'm just going to draw on this. This is going to be kind of a down and dirty drawing here. Is I would take my system DFMEA and I would have my functions. Oops, let me turn off my disappearing ink here. That will help. All right. So what I would probably do, I would start here and I'm just going to put an F down for functions. Function one, function two, function three, right? What you want that part to do. And then in this column, I would have the characteristics. So I know you're not going to do a full DFMEA down to anything but your supplier, or I should say your design engineers will have characteristic one, two, three. They should be able to let map the characteristics that tie back to functions. That's what I would do. It's a really good way to force it. It's kind of dirty in terms of it's not clean going down system from one system to the next, but function, because you might have 55 characteristics on a print, but they're all there to fulfill one function. An example of this, let's say that I have a hole in a part. There's hole position, there's hole diameter, there's hole condition, there's roundness, but it all might apply to being able to secure a part or to allow the part to slide, right? So there's a function that that bracket maintains. There might be 55 dimensions on it. So that's how I would do that. Because then when you go to your suppliers that are giving you their print, you could at least go, hey, the hole on your part, I know what it does in my system, right? That's how I would force that. Good question.
Great. Let's take maybe two more.
Sure.
Isaac wants to know how to start the PPAP activity with suppliers who are not ISO 9001 and IATF 16949 certified.
Okay, that's easy. Well, let's go. That's simple. Simple and easy are two different things. As the SQE, you're going to have to provide a certain amount of education from somewhere, and there's no way around it. The further you go down the tier chain, and this is a big maybe aha moment for some of you with the higher tier chain, when you get down to the tier threes and fours and fives, let's say you're a painting house, right? They could be painting your parts today and then painting goalposts for the local high school the next day. So automotive may be this much of their business, which means they may not have all the knowledge of a tier one or a tier two, because the higher you go up to the tier chain, the more of your business automotive is, right? Until at that tier one, you're very in depth with the OEM. So, how to go about this with the sub tiers? Honestly, what I have done, my PPAP documents have been augmented with notes. So, when I say send them over a control plan, there will be an entire guide of what goes where. And I have done either e-learnings with them, I've set up a Q&A time with them, and I have worked with them. I'm not saying arm in arm through the entire process, but it has been a very much a done with you activity. And when I say simple, that's as simple as it is. You're going to have to be that bridge. And that's just part of doing business with a company that isn't ISO 9000 or certainly isn't automotive. So that's my thought. That's the only way it works.
And let's take one more. We've got William who says, would you mind explaining more about why not to place product and process controls on the same line? Most control plans seem to have data on the same line. Is this an industry problem?
Oh, 100%. Let me give you this here. All right. So let me do this. And now this is my own scroll. So product and process characteristics in a control plan. So let me give you these areas. Let's say that the product characteristic is hole diameter, right? So there's my hole diameter symbol. Hole diameter is a function of bit size, speed, right? And let's do one more. One of the other factors might be even coolant, right? Coolant flow, right? So the reason why you either have it in the product or the process is because when we get over to spec, the spec column, this may be 10 millimeters. The bit size is its own spec. The speed is its own spec, right? The coolant has its own spec. There may be a flow rate or something like that. And then how you measure it, how you sample it, it's all just taking off on its own line. If you have bit size up here, how are you going to call out its own specification, its own evaluation technique? So it really is, it's either product or process. You should never put product and process in the same line because they're not the same. So it's a good question.
Great. All right. Thank you guys. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but we don't want to take up too much of your time. So here you want to clear your
Yep,
writing there. Thank you.
done.
So just as some final wrap-up notes, for all your attendees of this webinar, we are offering a 15% discount code when we email you the on-demand version of this webinar. Like as I mentioned earlier, you will receive sometime tomorrow. Our next upcoming Reviewing PPAP for Supplier Quality Professionals course runs on September 2nd, and that is a live virtual course. So some of you were asking about a more in-depth part two.
Yep.
That's where you're going to be able to get way more into the nitty gritty of all of this. This course is designed specifically for really delving into the details that maybe some of you are still having questions about. So take a look at that on our website. And again, I will include that discount code in your email. As I said, our website, you can also visit it at plexusintl.com. We have a blog that we try to update at least once every week. We also have a YouTube channel at PlexusINTL where we've got this webinar will go up there as well as a backlog of all of our previous webinars from 2023 and previously. And then you can also find us on LinkedIn at Plexus International. Anytime you have any questions, feel free to reach out. After this webinar ends, we will be providing you with a very short final survey. We would super appreciate it if you could just take a couple minutes to answer that. Any feedback you provide is always valuable. And we just wanted to thank you guys all for coming and giving us your time. It's been really great and we really appreciate you. So thank you.
All right. See you guys in the next one.